life on Earth depends on the freedom to move. Experience the extraordinary journeys that shape our world. Our Planet 2, only on Netflix.
Here we go. Hi, I'm Chuck Braverman. This is another episode of Westdoc Online. Today we are going out all around the world to a amazing Our Planet 2 episode like you've never seen before. I know a little bit about that because I've tried it myself, and I know it's over my pay grade. I think it's a certain skill set that I don't have. That's why I can't do it, and that's why we're going to have the producer of this series on. But before we do, I want to remind you we're brought to you by Realscreen Summit in January in New Orleans. If you go to our website, go down to the bottom. There's a Realscreen icon there. Click on it. It'll give you all the information for the upcoming Realscreen. So today we have the producer of Our Planet 2, whose name is Hugh Cordley. Hi, Hugh. How are you doing?
Very well, Chuck. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. As I said in the tease in the open, I did a pilot for Animal Planet years ago, and I think the premise of the pilot was we were supposed to go to the wetlands in Brazil and shoot the jaguar running around, and we thought, oh, okay, that sounds like fun. And fortunately, we had a couple that were sort of on-camera talent who were very talented and knew all the animals. We never saw a jaguar in the entire time we were there. We kept hearing, oh, it's just there, it's over there. We did a lot of other animals and a lot of other stuff, fortunately. I don't know how do you plan out a show like the 4-hour series that's now on Netflix called Our Planet 2, which is just shockingly amazing. I don't understand. That's the question. As I sat here, watched the show, and I have a list of questions, but the big question to me is, how the heck do you shoot a show like this?
Well, that's probably the best question to start with. And I would answer that in a number of ways. But firstly, it's about 6 months of research. So we don't take any chances. We put a lot of research into the stories we want to tell and make sure they're viable, both financially, logistically. We put as much effort as we can into the stories so that when we go on location, we have a very, very good chance of finding what we're looking for. I mean, as you said in your introduction, Our Planet 2 is a very ambitious series. We're not going for the low-hanging fruit here. We're going for ambitious sequences, often sequences that have never been done before. So you're kind of forging new ground, and that makes it very challenging. But you still, we don't embark on stories if we think the chances of filming what we want to film are very small. But it's a risk-benefit sort of equation each time. And, we do go for things that are very risky, and we just have to hope for the best, like you did when you went for your Jaguar. But back then, which year was that, Chuck? I'll probably be able to tell you why you didn't see one.
2005.
Yeah. So 2005, I would say we wouldn't have done Jaguars in 2005 because they were just, they were hunted. They were just very, very difficult to find. But, in the last 10 years, Jaguars in the Pantanal have been much more possible. We don't feature.
Now you tell me.
Now I tell you. Yes.
Where were you when I needed you in 2005?
Well, that's the thing is, we've been in the I've been in the business for nearly 25, 30 years. So we work with a lot of very specialist people, a lot of skillful people. We take a lot of advice from scientists and other filmmakers and other team members. So as I said, we go into every sequence with a lot of planning and background.
And we have just been joined by the other producer of the series, Keith Scoley. Hi, Keith. How are you?
Very pleased to be with you, and I'm sorry about the delay. As you say, we're supposed to be filmmakers, to be able to film all around the world, but sometimes computer technology trips us up. Well, yes, I found a man who could untrip me.
So we just were starting, and Hugh was just telling me about, I had mentioned that I was trying to do a show in 2005 about the Jaguar and the Pantanel, and I ended up, pivoting and doing something else because I never saw a Jaguar. So the question to me is, how do you pitch this show? What does the pitch look like from whatever period of time ago when you were going to Netflix to say, this is what we want to do, compared to what is ended up on camera, ended up in the show?
Well, I think the sort of starting point was whenever we come up with a new series, even if it's going to be a sequel to another series, the starting point is, well, what's the new angle we can get on the subject matter? And the first Our Planet series had really been all about habitats and looking at places in isolation of each other. So we thought the obvious next thing to do is, well, animals actually, in some cases, have to join habitats. So the road into the next story as such for a series is about journeys, it's about traveling, it's about migration. So that was the kind of the bare bones of the idea. And then we spent quite a lot of time then kind of fleshing that out and how could that look, what would it be like, and then took it to Netflix and say, what do you think of this?
Silverback Films is the production entity. I'm assuming from the notes. Can either of you tell me about Silverback and what it is compared to any other production company? How big is it? How long has it been around? How many people?
I could probably kick off that Hugh and I and our colleague Alistair Fothergill, we'd all worked together for a long time at the BBC in different guises and made wildlife films, and we decided that we would set ourselves up and created this company, Silverback. We started off very, very small, like most companies, but we had all had a track record of making big landmark shows for the BBC. And the company has then kind of grown on the back of the first series we did was a BBC one called The Hunt, and then we pitched the Our Planet series, and sort of the rest is history. Now we're Silverback Films is getting on for 200 people, which is, it's grown significantly, and we do all sorts of different shows for different clients, and but our biggest ones are for Netflix.
The talk around here in the last couple months has been, I'm going to diverge a little bit, and you can answer this or not, but has been that the major streamers, starting with Netflix, are sort of cutting back on quality shows. Do you get any sense of what's coming up in the immediate future for producers, not just of nature, high-end science shows, but in general?
I think we've got a really, really clear view on that from people like Netflix. Obviously, there's been a huge sort of earthquake in the media business, hasn't there? And that's been right across the whole thing. So there's definitely, across the piece, there's less money, isn't there, in the whole system. But I think and I can't speak for the broadcasters because they obviously have their own strategies. But I think, and this is not just Netflix, but I think that the general idea is we probably don't need to produce as much content, but what we do produce needs to cut through. It needs to be the highest quality. So the sort of message we're getting from a lot of different broadcasters is they're still going to spend good money on great content, but there'll probably be less of it in terms of volume.
Yes.
So this is for filmmakers, this show, for a lot. I mean, open to anybody, but the high percentage of the viewers are actual filmmakers. Can you give me an idea of how do you budget for a nature show like this in advance, and
Well,
when you get in trouble out in the boonies somewhere, you know, can you go back to Netflix or whoever? How does that work on this kind of a show?
I think the quickest way to answer that is past experience is the best early guide as to what kind of money we need. You know, we've been doing this for some time, so we're very well aware of the kind of time we need and the money we need in order to make a series of this nature. And those are the two most important ingredients. You kind of need the time because very often what you want to film is a seasonal piece of behavior, and you can't risk it over one season. So you need at least 2 seasons. And of course that ramps up the cost. But you also need money to fail. And I know that sounds funny, but if you don't have money to fail, then you go for the low-hanging fruit. So you kind of need those 2 things. And our past experience basically shows us what kind of budgets we need to make the ambitious shows and distinctive shows that Keith has just talked about, that we think broadcasters and streamers really want. And I think that's the most important thing. I'm not going to give you a number, but I think it's you know, it is knowing what a global series takes and making sure that we have both those 2 elements.
Are there, I mean, you know, on a lot of talent-based shows or whatever, you do a show and you say the budget, I'm going to pick a number out of left field, which means nothing, just for a point of reference. The show is going to be $1 million. But if we get this talent, it's going to be $1,250,000 or something like that. So if you get out there and you spend X number of weeks or months chasing polar bears or whatever, and you can't get it, and you know you need something to fill that gap, can you go back to Netflix and say, well, you know, we didn't get it, or what kind of arrangement do you have with them on a show like this, which is so basically unpredictable?
I think we pride ourselves in never going back to a broadcaster and asking for more money. As Hugh said, I think our skill as wildlife filmmakers is to do the risk calculation at the start of the show, and then saying, look guys, if you want to do this kind of show, it's going to cost this price. But if you give us this amount of money for this show, we will deliver you the show, and we will take on that risk, come what may. I've never gone back to a broadcaster ever to ask for more money, and I don't ever intend to do that, because that's our profession. That's what we do. And Hugh's right. It's difficult because the audience always wants more, and they want new things, and a new thing is new because people haven't tried it because it's too risky. So you always have to risk, but you have to do those calculations very, very carefully in terms of the money. And we find with all our clients, and especially Netflix, they listen very carefully to our arguments, and then they say, yeah, okay, here's the money, and that's the deal, and we then manage it from there.
I mean, Chuck, you could come up with, you know, what does it cost to film, you know, a jaguar in the Pantanal, and we could probably come up with a figure, you know, knowing what sort of behavior you're after, probably in just a few days, because we've got a lot of experience with this kind of thing. And in order to sort of answer your question about what do you do when you fail, well, we budget that as well. And so we have a contingency. And for shoots that don't work out, or maybe don't work out as we planned, then we have to decide whether is it worth investing more money of our contingency in this sequence, or is it worth moving on? Now, I could give you 2 cases on Our Planet 2 where that happened. So we were trying to film Flying Fish, and there was a very particular story that we were trying. We had all the right elements to it. The research seemed good. We had the logistics set up. But when we got out there, it turned out that there'd been a catastrophic crash in flying fish populations due to overfishing that nobody seemed to be really aware of. We kind of found it out for ourselves. And as consequently, the shoot wasn't very successful. And they came back with very little. And I decided that it wasn't worth pursuing that. And so we dropped it. So whatever money we spent, we lost. And nothing from that shoot went into the finished series. On the other side, we wanted to film Christmas Island crabs dispersing their eggs into the ocean and then also filming the returning crablets. Now, this is a really, really risky thing. Sometimes you don't have big returns for a decade. But we wanted to do it because it was a great story for us, and nobody had really done it before. The first time we did it, not a single crablet, I mean, it was extraordinary, not a single crablet returned to the beaches of Christmas Island. Now, it was the same situation as with the flying fish. We got nothing or very little. What do we do? Do we dump it or do we carry on? And I thought, no, this isn't the low-hanging fruit. If we get this, it's a big payoff. So we decided to have another go. And so we went back the following year, and this is what we were saying about needing the extra seasons. Because you can't just go, if you fail in 1 month, you can't go back the next month. You have to wait for a whole year. So we went back the following year, and on Christmas Eve, on Christmas Island, we had one of the biggest crablet returns in 5 or 6 years. And so we got that extraordinary scene. I hope you have a chance to, or if you haven't had get a chance to watch it, it's in episode 3. Just the beaches are red with millions of little crablets, and it's an incredibly impressive sequence, I think. But these are the judgments that Keith and I are making while we're doing a big series like this. We obviously don't want to throw good money after bad, but sometimes you think, no, it's worth it. Let's have another go.
Was the period of time roughly 2 years from the time they said, okay, let's do this show to the time you delivered, or what was the period of time?
I would say it's more like 3.5 years. So,
Wow.
We had 6 months of research. I mean, very unfortunately, and we'll all remember this forever, those that are alive, we started filming in June 2020. And obviously what was happening in June 2020, there was a global lockdown. So we had a massive challenge from the get-go. And the first shoot we did was that amazing shoot of the adult locusts, the plague swarm locusts. I mean, it was phenomenal. And we knew it was happening. And under normal circumstances, we'd get the very best crew in the UK or US, and we'd put them on plane and we'll get them out to wherever it was happening. But we couldn't do that. So we had to find local crews and direct from the UK. And we were very fortunate. We found some incredible talent in Kenya. And we managed to film that sequence, which was astonishing. It was the biggest swarm they'd seen for nearly 70 years. So that was a bit of luck, but it was also a lot of planning and a lot of logistical setting up between UK and Kenya.
On the trailer and some of the making of films, I noticed you have some very unique gear. For example, I mean, it's not that unique, but I think it's pretty unique to be out in the middle of the boonies, and it looked to me like you had a gimbal attached to the front end of a four-wheel drive Jeep or something like that. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, again, a lot of filmmakers are watching this. What kind of gear do you take out to get these amazing shots?
Yeah. Well, I think the short answer is a lot of gear. And I think that scientists that we work alongside often are sort of amazed that when we turn up, we've got like 30 cases to film a small spider. But, it's very well thought out. We obviously don't want to just carry unnecessary gear around the world because it's expensive and excess baggage. It's bad for the carbon footprint. So everything we take out has to be thought through carefully. But increasingly, with the development of certain technologies, we tend to have several different camera systems now. When Keith and I set off, often it was just with one film. At the beginning of our careers, with one film camera. But now you've got sort of like a main camera with a very, very long lens, 1,000mm lens. Let's say a red camera with a very long lens. You've got drones. You've got maybe camera traps. high-end camera traps, and you've gyrostabilized systems. So the system you're talking about is a GSS gyrostabilized system with a very long lens in it. And we put this system on all kinds of vehicles. It started off on helicopters when we were doing Planet Earth, the original in 2005. And now we've put it on boats, on 4x4s, on, tractors. I mean, we put them on all kinds of vehicles. And, it's been fundamental to our work in wildlife films because, very often we can't get close to animals. So, we're using this very, very sophisticated, expensive gyrostabilized systems to get close shots of the animals we want to film. This technology, these advances in technology is what keeps us sort of excited very often because it allows us to tell new stories or less new stories, sort of familiar stories, but in new ways.
What's roughly the shooting ratio and the editing process like for you?
Maybe I'll jump in on that. So Hugh and I both come from the age of film. And in the age of film, in wildlife films, we used to get scolded if we went to 100 to 1. And that was a terrible, that was really bad news. I think now with video, we have two actually sorts of cinematographers. We have some of the old school guys who came from film and they quite sort of careful about when they push the button. And there are people who've never experienced film or what have you. And they record a lot. And we also have all these remote cameras that are on and off. So no, absolutely. The ratio has probably gone into the thousands. I regret. So what's happened now then is it's pushed all the workload down into logging and looking at the rushes and a lot of our team's time is spent doing that and going through the material. I think although it's excessive having these huge ratios, probably we're still getting better shots for it and so it is worth all of the logging and the hassle, but it's becoming it's far more of a problem. We pride ourselves though in when an editor goes into the editing room that what they get and what they see has been slimmed right down to what is essential for the cut. And so they're not looking at thousands of hours of footage. They're just looking at really trying to get it back to 100 to 1.
Yeah, I mean, I totally concur. I will tell you a story though, Chuck, because I took one of our assistant producers to task. I mean, he's a very, very good guy, but he came back from a shoot that we had done in Mexico on the turtle hatchlings. And it turned out that we had over 100 hours of shot footage. And it was going to be a 5-minute sequence. And I was like, this is just way, way too much. But to be fair to him, it's what Keith said. We had so many different cameras on that shoot. We had 2 cameramen and we had a drone guy. We had somebody in the water. We had camera traps. And of course, when you add up all this footage that's being recorded, over, let's say 3 or 4 weeks, of course, you inevitably end up with masses of footage. But it's very expensive on time. So, I still encourage everybody to try to keep their shooting ratios down because otherwise, you can spend months going through it. But as Keith said, I mean, when our editors start, they're definitely starting from a standpoint of, the very best footage, which could be, a shooting ratio of anything from 20 to 1 to, 100 to 1. But yeah, we've got rid of all the dross, but it takes time to get rid of the dross.
So you gentlemen have been doing this for a long time. Do you see the effects of global warming when you go out to location now that's more obvious or?
Oh, yes.
What?
We used to, when I started filmmaking, I did a lot in East Africa. And I actually grew up in East Africa. And in the 80s or what have you, rainy seasons happened. They started within a few days of, you could sort of say, okay, the short rains are going to start round about the 5th of November. and it'll be maybe 5 days before, 5 days after. Now you ask anyone in Africa, when are the rains coming? They all just look in despair and say, who knows? Might be then, might happen. And so that's just one kind of microcosm. But everywhere we go now, all the things we used to rely on as predictors, especially in the ocean, when is this kind of spawning event going to happen? When is this going to happen? Da 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 da. It's all over the place. And obviously the most extreme places you see it are places like the Arctic, where when we started filming in the Arctic, the sea ice used to last, right through into the late summer, places like Svalbard, and now it's gone by June. So it's a rapidly changing world, and it's very alarming.
And also the reach, and a sort of a second element to that is the reach of humanity. You can go to the most remote places on the planet and see the effects we've had on the planet. And a very good example of that is in the first episode, where we were filming an albatross on the island of Laysan in the Hawaiian archipelago. And the island's just covered in plastic. And this plastic drifts there from 3 continents, and yet it's an uninhabited island, one of the most remote islands on the planet, and it's covered in human plastic. And not only is it covered in plastic, but the albatross adults mistake this plastic as it's floating in the sea for food, sweep it up in their beaks, and then feed it to their chicks, who then die horrible deaths with their stomachs filled with particles of plastic and things like cigarette lighters and toothbrushes and printer cartridges, all kinds of terrible things.
Can you tell me what is your company working on next, or what animals or nature are you chasing around the world now?
Well, we've got an incredibly exciting Netflix series coming out in the autumn. That's our next big piece, which has been sort of slightly teased by Netflix, but it's called Life on Our Planet. It's the story of life on Earth, and it's a collaboration between us and Amblin Television. So it's got animation in it. So for the first time, we've gone back to create extinct creatures to tell the story of Earth. So it's a fantastically exciting hybrid of both natural history and special effects. Company ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, have done the special effects, so they're absolutely top notch. And it's a series. We're so excited because we've never done anything like it. I don't think anyone's ever done anything like it, and there'll be more of that coming out in the summer. In terms of, I probably should say no more, but I think that's our next big piece coming up.
And I'm just finishing a feature-length documentary on orangutans for Netflix, which we are coming to the end of. So hopefully viewers can see that on Netflix towards the end of the year.
How is it working with Sir David Attenborough talent? I mean, is it different than a voiceover from?
Oh yeah. No, we've been. I met David when I was 24, so he's been, and I'm a bit older now. You can probably guess. So Hugh and I, working with him for 40 years, and he is the best narrator of natural history film, by far. Probably because he knows the subject so well, but he's also. He's a hugely able, capable filmmaker in his own right. He ran the British Broadcasting Corporation's television arm. You know, he was the first controller of BBC Two, one of our big channels. So he's got this huge creative mind. He has a huge amount about natural history, and his brother was a very famous actor, Richard Attenborough, and David's got a bit of that in him, and his whole performance as a narrator is a performance, but you can't tell that because it's so good. He just draws you in to a program in a way that I think very few other people can do, and you have no idea. You forget he's there. He's your guy on the shoulder, but he just takes you in and really draws the emotion out of every single line. So yeah, no, he's something else.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate the series is amazing, and I encourage everybody to go to Netflix and take a look at it.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you very much, Chuck.
Thank you.